Samuel Martinez had been walking the dusty trails of the Arizona Territory for 3 years, carrying nothing but a worn leather satchel, a canteen, and memories he preferred to leave behind. The sun beat down mercilessly on the Red Canyon walls as he made his way through the narrow passage that locals called Devil's Throat. His boots crunched against the loose gravel, and sweat stained his faded blue shirt despite the early morning hour. Samuel was not like the other drifters who wandered these lands. He had been a teacher once in a small town back in Kansas, before the war changed everything. The conflict had taken his brother, his home, and his faith in staying in one place too long. Now he moved from settlement to settlement, offering his skills as a reader and writer to anyone who needed help with letters or land documents. It was honest work, and it kept him moving. That morning, as he rounded a bend in the canyon, Samuel heard voices carried on the wind. He stopped, pressing himself against the cool shadow of a large boulder. The voices were angry, urgent, speaking in a mixture of English and Spanish. Samuel had learned enough of both languages during his travels to understand they were discussing someone who had been captured. Carefully, he climbed higher up the rocky slope to get a better view. Below, in a small clearing beside a muddy stream, he saw 4 men on horseback. They wore the dusty clothes of ranch hands, but their manner suggested they were more than simple cowboys. One of them, a heavy-set man with a thick black beard, was gesturing wildly with his hands as he spoke. Between the horses, Samuel could see a figure sitting on the ground, hands bound behind their back. Even from his hidden position, he could tell it was a woman. Her long black hair hung loose around her shoulders, and she wore the traditional dress of the Apache people. She sat perfectly still, her head held high despite her predicament. Samuel had encountered Apache families during his travels. Most were peaceful people trying to live their lives despite the constant pressure from the expanding settlements. This woman showed no fear, though Samuel could see the tension in the way the men around her kept looking over their shoulders, as if expecting trouble. The bearded man dismounted and walked over to the woman. Samuel could hear him speaking, though the exact words were unclear from his distance. The man's tone was threatening, demanding. The woman responded in Apache, her voice calm and steady. Whatever she said made the man angry, and he raised his hand as if to strike her. Samuel found himself moving before he had time to think. He had seen enough injustice in his life to recognize it when it appeared before him. His feet carried him down the slope, using the natural cover of boulders and scrub brush to get closer to the scene below. As he approached, Samuel could hear more of the conversation. The men were arguing among themselves about what to do with their prisoner. One wanted to take her to the territorial authorities, claiming there was a bounty for Apache captured alive. Another insisted they should leave her and continue on their way. The bearded man, who seemed to be their leader, had different ideas. Samuel reached a position where he could see the woman's face clearly. She was young, perhaps 25 years old, with strong features and intelligent dark eyes. There was something familiar about her, though Samuel was certain they had never met. Then, he remembered, he had seen a drawing of her in the territorial newspaper he had picked up in the last town. Her name was Maria Delgado, though that was the Spanish name the newspapers used. Samuel had read that she was a translator and mediator who worked between the Apache bands and the territorial government. She had been instrumental in negotiating several peaceful resolutions to conflicts that could have turned violent. The newspaper had called her a bridge between two worlds. Now Samuel understood why these men had taken her. There had been rumors of Apache raids on cattle ranches, and some of the more aggressive ranchers had been calling for military action against all Apache settlements, peaceful or not. Maria's work for peace made her an obstacle to those who preferred the profits that came with conflict and the seizure of Apache lands. The bearded man was speaking again, his voice louder now. Samuel caught enough words to understand the threat. They planned to take Maria to a remote location where they claimed she would be executed as a spy and raider. Samuel knew this was not justice, but Murder dressed up in the language of frontier law. Samuel checked his pocket watch. It was still early, perhaps 8 in the morning. The men seemed in no hurry to move, apparently waiting for something or someone. This gave Samuel time to think, to plan. He was not a violent man by nature, but he had learned during the war that sometimes action was necessary to prevent greater harm. Moving carefully, Samuel circled around the clearing to get a better sense of the layout. There was only one clear path out of this canyon, the same one he had been traveling. The stream created another barrier, and the walls of the canyon were too steep to climb quickly. If he was going to help this woman, he would need to be clever about it. The woman, Maria, had not spoken again since her initial response to the bearded man. She sat in what appeared to be meditation or prayer, her eyes closed, her breathing steady. Samuel found himself admiring her composure in such circumstances. It reminded him of his grandmother, who had faced hardship with the same quiet strength. One of the younger men dismounted to water his horse at the stream. This gave Samuel an idea. He picked up a handful of small stones and began throwing them into the water upstream from where the man stood. The splashing sounds made the horse nervous, and it pulled away from the stream, forcing the man to follow. As the group's attention focused on controlling the skittish horse, Samuel saw his opportunity. He had noticed a large dead tree branch lying near where Maria sat. If he could create enough confusion, he might be able to cut her bonds and give her a chance to escape. Samuel moved closer, staying low behind the rocks and brush. His heart was pounding, but his hand was steady. He had learned in his teaching days that clear thinking under pressure was often more valuable than quick reflexes. He needed to time this perfectly, creating maximum confusion while giving Maria the best possible chance to get away. The bearded man was growing impatient with his companion's struggle with the horse. He shouted orders, telling the others to help get the animal under control. For a moment, all 4 men were focused on the horse, their backs partially turned toward Maria. Samuel made his move. He stood up and called out in a loud, commanding voice, speaking in the formal tone he had once used to control unruly students. His sudden appearance and authoritative voice had the desired effect. The men spun around in surprise, temporarily confused about where the voice had come from and how many people might be approaching their position. The 4 men scrambled for their weapons, looking in all directions for the source of the voice. Samuel had positioned himself behind a large boulder on the slope above them, giving him the advantage of higher ground while remaining partially hidden. He knew this advantage would not last long, but he only needed a few moments. "Let the woman go," Samuel called out, his voice echoing off the canyon walls. He deliberately did not reveal exactly where he was, allowing the echo to confuse his position. "She has done nothing wrong, and you have no authority to hold her." The bearded man, still clutching his rifle, shouted back, "Who are you? Show yourself." His eyes darted between the rocks above, trying to locate Samuel's position. The other 3 men had formed a loose circle, their weapons drawn, but uncertain where to aim. Samuel had been counting on their confusion, but he also knew it would not last. While he spoke, he had been moving carefully along the ridge, working his way toward a position directly above where Maria sat. He could see that she had opened her eyes and was listening intently to the exchange, though she remained perfectly still. "I am someone who believes in justice," Samuel replied, now speaking from a different position. This caused the men to spin around again, their confusion growing. "What you're doing here is not justice. It is kidnapping and murder." The bearded man's face was red with anger and frustration. "This is none of your business, stranger. This woman is a spy and a raider. We are taking her to face proper judgment." Samuel had reached the position he wanted, directly above the clearing. He could see Maria clearly now, and he noticed that she had managed to loosen her bonds slightly while the men were distracted. She was clever and resourceful, just as he had hoped. "If that were true," Samuel called out, "you would be taking her to the territorial authorities in Tucson, not to some remote location for a secret execution." His words hit their mark. One of the younger men looked uncomfortable, glancing nervously at his companions. Samuel reached into his satchel and pulled out a small leather pouch filled with coins, his savings from months of work. He had been planning to use this money to buy supplies for the winter, but now he saw a better use for it. He threw the pouch hard against a rock wall 30 feet to the left of the men's position. The sound of coins scattering across stone was loud and distinctive. All four men immediately turned toward the noise, assuming someone was approaching from that direction. In that moment of distraction, Samuel picked up the largest rock he could handle and hurled it down toward the horses. The rock struck the ground between the animals, causing them to rear up in panic. The horses pulled against their reins, and two of them broke free, galloping away from the clearing in different directions. The chaos was exactly what Samuel had hoped for. "Now," he shouted to Maria. She had been waiting for this moment. Her bonds, weakened by her careful work while the men were distracted, snapped as she pulled hard against them. She rolled away from her sitting position and came up running, heading for the narrow trail that led out of the canyon. The bearded man realized what was happening and fired a shot in Maria's direction, but his aim was wild due to his panic and the continuing chaos of the frightened horses. Samuel stood up on the ridge and began throwing rocks down at the men, not trying to injure them seriously, but making it dangerous for them to take careful aim at the fleeing woman. "Stop her!" the bearded man shouted, but his companions were busy trying to catch their remaining horses and avoid the rocks raining down from above. One of them managed to get off another shot, but by then, Maria had reached the cover of the larger boulders near the trail entrance. Samuel knew he had only moments before the men organized themselves and came after both him and Maria. He scrambled down the far side of the ridge, away from the clearing, moving as quickly as he could over the rough terrain. His plan was to circle around and meet Maria further up the trail, where they could travel together to safety. The descent was treacherous, with loose rocks that threatened to send him tumbling down the steep slope. Samuel could hear the men shouting to each other behind him, their voices growing more distant as he moved away from the clearing. At least one of them was on foot now, probably pursuing Maria up the trail. Samuel reached the bottom of the ridge and began running parallel to the main trail, staying hidden in the brush and rocky terrain. He knew this country well enough to find his way, having traveled these paths several times over the past year. There was a place about a mile ahead where the trail curved around a large formation of rocks. If he could reach that spot before Maria and her pursuer, he might be able to help her again. His lungs burned as he ran through the desert heat, jumping over small ravines and dodging between the scattered boulders. Behind him, he could still hear voices, though they seemed to be arguing among themselves rather than pursuing him. Perhaps they had decided to focus on recapturing Maria rather than chasing an unknown man who had already cost them considerable time and trouble. Samuel reached the rock formation just as he heard footsteps approaching on the main trail. He positioned himself behind a large boulder and waited, hoping it would be Maria and not one of her captors. The footsteps were light and quick, suggesting someone running rather than the heavy tread of the ranch hand's boots. Maria appeared around the bend in the trail, moving swiftly but quietly, her head turning frequently to check behind her. She was breathing hard but seemed uninjured. Samuel stepped out from behind his hiding place, holding his hands where she could see them to show he meant no harm. She stopped immediately, her body tense and ready to run again if necessary. Samuel realized she had no way of knowing whether he was friend or enemy, despite his earlier intervention. He spoke quietly in the few words of Apache he knew, then switched to Spanish, hoping she would understand one of the languages. "I am the one who helped you escape," he said. "My name is Samuel. Those men are still looking for you." Maria studied his face for a long moment, her dark eyes assessing him carefully. Finally, she nodded and spoke in English, her accent slight but noticeable. "I heard your voice before. You saved my life. Thank you." "We need to keep moving," Samuel said. "They will come up this trail soon, and we need to be far from here when they do." Maria agreed and Together they began walking quickly up the trail. Samuel noticed she moved with the confident stride of someone who knew this land well. She did not seem tired despite her ordeal, and her escape had shown both courage and intelligence. Samuel felt confident they could stay ahead of their pursuers if they kept moving. "Why did you help me?" Maria asked as they walked. "You do not know me." Samuel considered the question for a moment. "I read about you in the newspaper. I know you work for peace between your people and mine. What those men wanted to do was wrong." Maria was quiet for a while, then spoke again. "Where are we going?" "There is a settlement about 20 miles north of here," Samuel said. "It has a telegraph office and a sheriff who is known to be fair. You will be safe there." But even as he spoke, Samuel wondered if anywhere would truly be safe for Maria if the men who had captured her represented a larger group with similar intentions. The Apache conflicts had created fear and hatred on both sides, and people like Maria, who worked to bridge the differences, often found themselves trusted by neither side completely. They walked steadily through the morning heat, both of them listening carefully for sounds of pursuit from behind. The sun climbed higher as Samuel and Maria made their way through the rocky terrain, leaving the main trail to follow paths that would be harder for their pursuers to track. Maria led the way now, her knowledge of the land proving invaluable as she guided them through hidden passages between the rocks and along dried creek beds that provided both cover and easier walking. They had been traveling for nearly 3 hours when Maria suddenly stopped and held up her hand for silence. Samuel froze, listening intently. In the distance, they could hear the sound of horses moving across rocky ground. The men had managed to catch their animals and were following their trail. "This way," Maria whispered, leading Samuel off the creek bed and up a steep slope covered with dense brush. They climbed quickly, but carefully, making sure not to disturb the vegetation in ways that would leave obvious signs of their passage. At the top of the rise, they found themselves looking down at a wide valley dotted with Joshua trees and sagebrush. In the distance, Samuel could see a thin column of smoke rising into the clear blue sky. "There's a ranch house there," Maria said quietly. "But the man who owns it is not friendly to Apache people. We cannot ask for help there." Samuel nodded, understanding the difficult position Maria faced. Even people who might be willing to help a lost traveler might not extend the same courtesy to an Apache woman, especially if they had heard the inflammatory stories that some newspapers printed about Apache raiders. "We need water," Samuel said, checking his nearly empty canteen. The heat was becoming intense, and they had been walking hard for hours. "Is there a stream or spring nearby?" Maria pointed toward a cluster of cottonwood trees about 2 miles to the east. "There's water there, and the trees will give us shade. We can rest and decide our next direction." They made their way carefully down the far side of the slope, moving from one patch of cover to another. Behind them, the sounds of their pursuers had grown fainter, suggesting the men were still following the creek bed trail they had abandoned. When they reached the cottonwood grove, Samuel was relieved to find a clear spring feeding a small pool of cool water. Both of them drank deeply and refilled Samuel's canteen. The shade of the large trees provided blessed relief from the sun, and Samuel realized how exhausted he had become. "You should rest," Maria said, noticing his fatigue. "I will watch for danger." Samuel wanted to protest that he should be the one standing guard, but he could see that Maria was more accustomed to this kind of travel and hardship. Her breathing was steady, her movement still confident and alert. He accepted her offer and settled into the shade of the largest tree. "Tell me about your work," Samuel said as Maria took a position where she could see the approaches to their resting place. "The newspaper said you helped negotiate between the Apache bands and the territorial government." Maria was quiet for a moment, as if deciding how much to share with this stranger who had risked his own safety to help her. "My father was Apache," she said finally. "My mother was Mexican. I grew up speaking 3 languages and living in 2 worlds. When I became old enough, I realized I could help prevent some of the misunderstandings that lead to violence. It must be difficult work, Samuel said. People on both sides probably view you with suspicion sometimes. Yes, Maria agreed. Some Apache believe I am too willing to compromise with the white settlers. Some settlers believe I am helping Apache raiders plan their attacks. The truth is that most people on both sides want to live in peace, but they are afraid of each other. Samuel thought about his own wandering, how he had chosen to keep moving rather than settle down and invest in any one community. Fear makes people do terrible things, he said. I have seen it in my travels. What about you? Maria asked. What brings a teacher to these desert trails? Samuel was surprised she had remembered his mention of his former profession. I was a teacher once in Kansas, but the war changed everything. My younger brother died at Gettysburg, and my parents died of illness while I was away serving as a medic. When I came home, there was nothing left that felt like home. Maria nodded with understanding. You have been running from your grief. Her words stung because they were true, but Samuel did not feel judged by them. There was something about Maria's direct honesty that made it easier to acknowledge painful truths. Perhaps, Samuel admitted. But today, stopping to help you, it felt different. It felt like something my brother would have done. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, both of them listening to the peaceful sounds of water moving over stone and birds calling from the branches above. Samuel found himself thinking about what Maria had said about living in two worlds. He realized that his wandering had been an attempt to live in no world at all, to avoid the pain of belonging anywhere. We should continue moving, Maria said after they had rested for about an hour. Those men will not give up easily. They represent people who profit from conflict between Apache and settlers. My work threatens their plans. Samuel stood and shouldered his satchel. Where do you suggest we go? That settlement I mentioned may not be safe enough if these men have influence there. Maria considered this carefully. There is a mission school about 30 miles northeast of here. The priest there, Father Miguel, is a good man who has helped Apache families before. He has connections with territorial officials who support peaceful solutions. 30 miles, Samuel repeated. That is 2 days of hard walking. Maybe 3 if we have to avoid our pursuers. I know places where we can find water and shelter, Maria said. But you have already risked much to help me. You do not need to continue this journey. Samuel looked at her seriously. Those men saw my face. They know I interfered with their plans. Even if I left you now, I would not be safe from them. Besides, he added with a slight smile, I have been walking these territories for 3 years without purpose. It feels good to walk towards something important. Maria smiled in return, the first time Samuel had seen her face truly relaxed since their meeting. Then, we traveled together. They left the grove and began walking northeast, following game trails and dry washes that Maria knew would eventually lead them toward the mission. As they walked, Samuel found himself asking Maria about her life, her work, and her hopes for the future. Her answers revealed an intelligent, thoughtful woman who had faced more challenges than most people could imagine, yet retained a fundamental optimism about human nature. In return, Maria asked Samuel about his teaching, his family, and his travels. Gradually, Samuel found himself talking about things he had not discussed with anyone for years: his love of books and learning, his regret at leaving his profession, his loneliness during his years of wandering. As the afternoon wore on, they developed a comfortable rhythm of walking and talking. Samuel began to understand why Maria was effective as a negotiator. She had a gift for listening deeply and asking questions that helped people clarify their own thoughts and feelings. When evening approached, Maria led them to a small canyon where a series of natural caves provided shelter. She showed Samuel how to build a small fire using dried wood that would produce minimal smoke, and they shared some dried corn and jerky that Maria carried in a pouch at her waist. Tomorrow we will reach the mountains, Maria said, looking toward the distant peaks that were now visible on the horizon. The mission is in a valley on the far side. Once we are there, you will be safe to continue your travels. Samuel nodded, but he found himself reluctant to think about leaving. The day's journey had given him a sense of purpose he had not felt since before the war. More than that, he had discovered that Maria was not just someone who needed protection, but a person of remarkable strength and wisdom who had enriched his understanding of the world. "What will you do when we reach the mission?" Samuel asked. "Father Miguel will help me send word to the territorial authorities about what happened today. There will be an investigation, and hopefully the men who capture me will face justice. Then I will return to my work." "Even after this danger? Are you not afraid they will try again?" Maria stared into the small fire for a moment before answering. "Fear is natural, but it cannot guide our choices. If I stop my work because of threats, then the people who profit from conflict win. More people die when there is no one working for peace." Samuel admired her courage, but he also worried about her safety. "Perhaps you could find ways to do your work that do not require so much personal risk." Maria looked at him with gentle amusement. Says the man who risked his life to help a stranger. Samuel had no good answer to that, and they both laughed softly. As they prepared to sleep, taking turns keeping watch, Samuel realized that his encounter with Maria had begun to change something fundamental in his thinking about his future. The next morning, they resumed their journey toward the mountains. The landscape gradually changed from desert to pine forests as they climbed higher. Samuel's respect for Maria continued to grow as he watched her navigate the challenging terrain and make the countless small decisions that kept them hidden from pursuit while moving steadily toward their goal. By evening of the second day, they reached the mission school. Father Miguel, an elderly man with kind eyes and weathered hands, welcomed them without question and listened carefully as Maria explained what had happened. He immediately sent word to trusted contacts in the territorial government and offered Samuel and Maria's safe haven for as long as they needed it. That night, as Samuel sat in the mission's peaceful courtyard, he realized that his 3 years of wandering had led him to this moment of choice. He could continue his aimless travels, or he could find a way to build something meaningful. Maria's example had shown him that it was possible to work for justice and peace even in difficult circumstances. When Maria found him there the next morning, Samuel had made his decision. "I would like to help with your work," he said simply. "I have skills as a teacher and writer that might be useful. And I have learned that running from purpose is no way to live." Maria smiled, and Samuel could see both surprise and happiness in her expression. "It will not be easy work," she warned. "There will always be people who profit from conflict and fear." "I know," Samuel said, "but yesterday taught me that some things are worth the risk." 3 months later, Samuel was teaching Apache children to read and write English while also learning to speak their language fluently. He had established a small school near the mission where children from both Apache families and settler families could learn together. Maria visited regularly, and together they worked on translating important documents and facilitating meetings between community leaders. The men who had captured Maria were eventually arrested and tried for kidnapping. Their trial revealed a larger conspiracy to provoke conflicts that would lead to the seizure of Apache lands, and several prominent ranchers and business leaders were implicated in the scheme. Samuel never returned to his wandering ways. He had found something worth staying for, not just his love for Maria, which grew steadily over the months, but his rediscovered sense of purpose in working for justice and understanding between people who had been taught to fear each other. Years later, when Samuel and Maria told their children the story of how they met, they would emphasize not the dramatic rescue or the dangerous journey, but the moment when two people from different worlds chose to trust each other and work together for something larger than themselves. It was a choice that changed not only their own lives, but the lives of hundreds of families who benefited from their work building bridges across cultural divides in the American Southwest.